can do and the core products, but what is in it from maybe a code first developer standpoint. So I want to do very high level overview of that so we can kind of talk through that. For those of you who might not know me, my name is April Dunham, and I am a Power Platform developer advocate at Microsoft. So I've been in this role for a few months now, so working with Donna Sarkar and team to help enable more people to start using the Power Platform. So really excited to be in this role. If you do have any questions after this, I'm available on Twitter at April Dunham. So happy to answer any questions if we can't get those today or if you think of something later on. I also have a YouTube channel, just search for my name on there. You can find that, and a blog as well. So lots of different ways that you can get in touch with me. I thought I would set the stage by, just talking about the Power Platform as a whole, right? I mean, obviously this is a boot camp. We're probably all familiar with what we can do with the Power Platform, but, 4 main products that we want to touch on here so that we can talk about what we can do as far as an extensibility standpoint and where we can integrate some, code first skills in here. And, one of the first things I want to touch on was lots of times when we think about Power Platform, we think it's a low-code technology. So it's probably just no or low code, right? You just drag and drop experience or maybe inject some Power FX, Excel-like formulas in there to do some more capability. But there is a play with the Power Platform for code-first professional development and extensibility across Microsoft. So that's one of the things that I love about it and why it's so extensible and kind of sets ourselves apart from maybe some of the other low-code products out there, is the fact that this is a tool for anyone, someone who might not have even come from a tech background. We have so many great stories about people who segue from different industries and all kinds of backgrounds, from maybe being in finance to becoming Power Platform developers. So it really is a platform for everyone. Obviously, we have Power Apps, which is the Power Apps Bootcamp is about here for application development. We have Power Automate for workflow and robotic process automation, Power Virtual Agents for chatbots, and Power BI for reporting and dashboards. All of that, obviously, sitting on Dataverse, the powerful database and platform for the Power Platform. We're able to leverage the data connectors that we have so we can easily plug and play with over 400 different services, and AI Builder, where we can even inject some artificial intelligence into our Power Platform solutions without having to write any code, using some of their pre-built models for things like forms processing and object recognition. So why exactly, too, I want to touch on, why is this important? Why should we be embracing Power Platform and low-code tools like that, maybe over, say, traditional developments that we see? We've probably seen this before, these kind of metrics here, but we're seeing about 500 million new applications are going to be built in the next 5 years, which is more than all applications built in the last 40 years. That's about 5 times faster demand for mobile applications than what IT departments can deliver right now. We're seeing organizations, about 85% of organizations struggle to analyze unstructured data, and 86%, an overwhelming 86% of organizations are struggling to find technical talent. So this is kind of a gap that low-code technology can help solve. I mean, with that 500 million new apps, where it's almost impossible to train up enough people in, front-end, back-end development and traditional programming to be able to meet that need. So the Power Platform can really help here, and investing your time in learning the Power Platform and how to extend it is a great way to kind of go into this. In fact, one of the most interesting metrics that I've seen here is about 65% of enterprise application development is going to be in the low-code category by 2024. That's just 3 years. So this is actually going to be the primary way that we really develop applications, is by using some kind of low-code technology like the Power Platform. So this is a great area to invest in from a career standpoint as well. So diving into the meat of this conversation we're having here, what exactly is in it for code-first developers? If you have traditional programming language background like C#, .NET, JavaScript, and all of that. Well, as I said, Power Platform is a platform for everyone. It empowers everyone to be a developer. So we can leverage Power Apps to build applications and front ends quickly with drag and drop and Excel-like formulas and all of that. But we can also leverage the tools that we're used to using as code-first developers, like Visual Studio, VS Code, Azure services, and APIs, and even GitHub. So there's a place in this for everyone. And the great thing about it is we don't really have to learn a bunch of new skills. We can take those code first skills that we already have, and there's room for those skills in the Power Platform already. So for example, if you happen to know TypeScript and you build a lot in that, you can start building extensions with Power Apps and the Power Apps component framework, which I'll talk a little bit more later on, to build custom components. That's a skill. That's all you really need to know is a little bit of TypeScript to be able to get started with that. Obviously, if you know VS Code and Visual Studio Code, if you're using those are tools that we can also use to develop and extend the Power Platform. APIs is a huge way that we can integrate in with the Power Platform. So if you're an API whiz, we can take those APIs, create custom connectors, which again, I'll explain more here in a second, around those to enable end users and business users to plug and play those APIs that you have and you've created into their applications and their workflows. If you know common frameworks like React, that's another good tool that we can also leverage in Power Platform, and command line tooling as well. So if you have any of these skills and you're already doing this in your day-to-day, you can start leveraging those in the Power Platform, which is really great. One of the things that I think we need to talk about too is if you're coming from that traditional developer background, sometimes you might hear people wondering, well, is low-code technology and stuff like the Power Platform going to make me not have a job? Am I going to be needed? Well, that couldn't be farther from the truth. If anything, what this low-code technology is doing is it's allowing us to extend our development teams. So you might have heard us use the phrase quite a bit, fusion development. So that's kind of what we're calling or phrasing this hybrid of those people with traditional programming language backgrounds, your code-first developers. You'll hear kind of lots of different terminology for that, with people that are citizen developers or end users that are using the low-code technology. They can work together and we can have these fusion development teams to accelerate being able to build business solutions. So that's what a fusion developer team is, a code first developer and a citizen developer working together to solve a business problem and create applications. So some example of how this fusion development team way of working would go would be maybe a code first dev building a backend API that a citizen dev can then consume in their Power Platform solutions. And one of the things that's really cool about this is, if you do come from a code first background, that's, at least in my experience, I don't know if this translates for everyone here, but you kind of end up having to be sometimes the jack of all trades. Maybe you're really passionate about APIs, or maybe you're really passionate about front-end development, and you find yourself having to kind of do a little bit of everything and not being to solely focus on what you're really passionate about. This fusion development approach and embracing the Power Platform helps with that. So if really all you like doing is APIs and that's your core focus and what you love, you don't like doing the front end stuff, well, a citizen developer, a business user can build a really nice looking front end in Power Apps, and then you can do all the cool backend integrations with APIs and like that. So it really helps you focus on what you love and what you want to do. Another role that we're seeing with code first developers in this fusion development approach is being more kind of like an architect to make sure that the app building process is more strategic. So lots of ways that code first developers can start leveraging the Power Platform and helping build their fusion development teams. So now that I've kind of sold what we can do from a fusion development and code first developer approach, let's talk about the specific ways that we can extend the platform. First approach that I want to talk about is unlocking data silos with custom connectors, which I briefly alluded to there in the intro. So what is a custom connector? All that is a wrapper around an API. And that's what the Power Platform uses to communicate to the different services, like all the Microsoft services there's connectors for, or any custom service or API that you want to connect to. So how it actually works Right now we have over 400 different connectors to various services. So obviously all of the Microsoft services, as you would expect, and then other third-party services like MailChimp and Dropbox and things like that. We have the connector, which is that wrapper around the API. All we have to do is add that connector into our applications or flows, and they have different actions and triggers associated with them so that we can interact with those easily. So when this comes into play, like, well, what if there's something you want to connect to that isn't included in one of those 400 different connectors? That's where something called custom connectors will come into play and where your code first development skills will be really helpful. With a custom connector, we can allow those professional developers or code first developers to create the building blocks and that API layer and then publish that as a connector so that citizen developers can use that in their applications. So these custom connectors, the other cool thing about it is they work both, you build it once and they'll work in Power Apps and Power Automate and all that. You don't have to build multiple connectors for each of the different products in the Power Platform. So maybe it's extending something. Maybe, for example, like what this is showing here, you want to do some more advanced AI stuff with the text analysis or analytics API in Azure Cognitive Services. You can work with that API, wrap it in a connector, and deploy that out so that everyone can use that in their apps and flows. So with that, one of the things you might be wondering, especially if you have started using the Power Platform and say Power Automate before, is why would we use a custom connector over maybe just making an HTTP request? Because in Power Automate, we do have an action that lets us make HTTP requests. So I did want to take a minute to address this and talk about why you might consider custom connectors over leveraging a flow there to handle that in the HTTP action. So one is simplicity. It's going to make it easier for your end users because especially when we're tackling this from like a code first developer standpoint, our end goal is always to bring value and make it easy for citizen developers and users to be able to leverage the tools and the extensions that we're bringing. So we can't expect that everyone is going to know what an HTTP request is, whether they need to do a post or a GET, and understand the URI paths and all of that goes into it. So by leveraging a connector, that's something that we all use every day within our Power Platform products, and we're very familiar with, and they're very simple to use. Another one is reusability. Again, by leveraging HTTP requests and Power Automate, there's a lot of duplication if you want to do that same process in multiple applications or flows. That component or that connector that we build, is able to be reused easily in different flows and different apps. Another one is unnecessary overhead. So if we wanted to call one of the APIs that we're trying to call a custom API in Power Apps, there's no direct way to do that. We don't have an HTTP connector in Power Apps itself. That means that we have to go create a flow in Power Automate to do that and call the flow in our app. So if we did that as a custom connector instead, we could directly call that with inside Power Apps and not have to have that intermediary kind of layer of Power Automate in there. And then finally, better logging and analytics. In the Power Platform Admin Center, we can track connector usage much better than we can track HTTP requests that we're making. So lots of great reasons to embrace and use custom connectors. Next thing you're probably wondering is what APIs can I create a connector to? Good thing about this is it's any RESTful API you can connect to. These can be public APIs out there like Spotify. I know early on that's one of the first things that I did was leveraging Spotify there in a connector so that I can curate some playlist and tweet out what I was listening to. Public APIs, things like Azure Functions that you manage, Azure Web Apps, API management, and then private APIs leveraging the on-prem data gateway that we have to connect to services behind the firewall. As far as securing the APIs that you're building to be able to connect in custom connectors, it supports a few standard authentication methods like generic OAuth 2.0, OAuth 2.0 for services like Azure AD and GitHub, basic auth and API keys. Now, one of the best ways, though, if you're wanting to get started with custom connectors and integrating your APIs within the Power Platform, is to leverage Azure API Management. So we've did a lot of work here with API management to make it super easy to host your API in Azure API Management, and literally with a simple button click, you can deploy that custom connector into the Power Platform. So as you see here, I have an API for employees. I can click on that API, I can say export, and we have a native option there to export to Power Apps in Power Automate. This will go, I have to just click a button and it creates the connector for me. And now our citizen developers and end users, all they have to do is search for that connector in the data tab here for the employees connector, add that in as you see there, and they can start using it. It's really that simple when you're using Azure API Management. And another big benefit of this, and why I'm pointing it out here, is that traditionally, we have to have licensing discussion, right? If we're leveraging this in the full-fledged version of Dataverse, we would have to pay for premium licensing to consume and to create this connector in our Power Apps or Power Automate flows. However, if we're using the new Dataverse for Teams functionality, we can consume APIs and API management at no additional cost, included in whatever licensing you have that gives you access to Microsoft Teams. So that's another big reason to kind of host your APIs in Azure API Management and handle it that way. All right, so now moving on. So connectors to consume data from other services you have through APIs. The other big area where you can leverage your code first skills and really extend the platform is with something called PCF controls. PCF stands for Power Apps Component Framework, and really all that is a way that we give code first developers to build reusable custom UI components for Power Apps. So these, again, will be professionally developed controls that have well-defined contracts, lifecycle, and interaction models. So these can really improve performance, reliability, and diagnostics. They're generally available in model-driven apps, and they're also available in Canvas apps as well that you can leverage these components. So one of the things you might be wondering, though, is why would I really build a custom control with PCF? Because there's so many different controls available in Power Apps already. And that's true, it does ship with a lot of great out-of-the-box controls. However, there's going to be sometimes companies where they want like a richer, more tailored experience, kind of like what you're seeing here. Maybe you need some really specific charting for your Power App, or like a guided process like we're seeing here with provers and all of that. This is something where pro devs or code first devs, don't really like the pro dev term there, can use tools and the frameworks that you're familiar with, like TypeScript and React, to build these custom components so that citizen developers can use those within their application easily. So what type of code components can you add and create? So these could be field controls on a form. So for example, take something like a budget amount where you just have a text field with that amount. You can turn that into kind of like a pie, like a radio button type thing. Entity grids and subgrids. So this would be model-driven app specifics, but you can build out entity grids and subgrids like we're seeing there. Even unbound controls like pulling in weather information, business process steps, and display external content even. So maybe connecting to the Office graph or whatever it might be. And utilizing external services like graph APIs, charting and maps and all of that. So lots of ways we can do that. We do have a cool Power Apps Component Framework sample gallery with a bunch of samples out there, so you can kind of get an idea for what other type of things people are building with PCF and see how that they interact with in your applications. Some of the cool ones that I like is this Office UI Fabric icon generator. So one of the things with Power Apps, we do have some standard icons that we can use, but after a while, all of your applications start to look very similar by using those same out-of-the-box icons. So this particular component, built in PCF, lets us explore all of those Office UI Fabric icons and start using those easily within our Power Apps. And there's QR code generators, custom map controls for Google Map and all that. So lots of different areas and ways we can use PCF controls. I don't want to get too into the weeds from a technical standpoint because I know there's going to be more, code first developer focused sessions in this later on. But really, you just have an interface API SDK for control that provides the lifecycle methods and data and all of that. And that control implements the interface and the UI rendering logic. So there's a few different buckets of how this works and what makes up a custom component. You have a manifest input file, which just has your control definition, like your name, your version, properties, and all of that. You have your component implementation, which is TypeScript or JavaScript, and your user interface and functionality, and then your resource files, which is just your CSS, images, and localizations. All this too, you can leverage developer tooling with the Power Apps command line interface. So it's a simple to use command line interface that has built-in validations to let you catch issues before deployment. It can be used headless as part of an automated build process as well. And you have local debug, and it supports solution packaging. So you can use the CLI to create your new component and package it up into a solution so you can easily and seamlessly deploy that. All right, moving on, let's talk about Azure integrations. This is another big area for the Power Platform. So when you're leveraging Power Apps in Azure, that really extends the possibilities of what you can do from a rapid application development standpoint. So custom connectors is one way. Also, we can't forget about Azure DevOps. ALM is a huge part of this. I know there's sessions about ALM later on as well. So again, I'm not going to get too into the weeds. This is just more a high-level overview here. We can integrate with Azure DevOps within the Power Apps to automate our lifecycle. But the other thing I wanted to point out here is that Dataverse, which is that database, the platform that Power Platform sits on, actually runs on Azure. So this is something you may or may not have known here. But obviously we have Power Apps, Automates, virtual agents, and BI and all that. That all starts with a single endpoint. And that API endpoint connects you to all of the services, and load balancers come into play across several compute services for handling things like OData API requests and all of that. And we have a bunch of storage services that are used to kind of persist that data in the most performant way possible. So you don't need to worry about the service, about these things, because the service is taken care for you. It can handle, SQL relational data, blob, Cosmos, indexes, big data for data lake and all of that. And so all this is going on behind the scenes, as well as support for extensibility using Azure Functions, Event Hubs, Service Bus, and everything. Speaking of Dataverse, let's talk a little bit more about that and some of the APIs and extensions that we have there. So with Dataverse, everything you do in Dataverse creates an API. So these are the same APIs that are consumed by all the Power Platform products, AI Builder even. These APIs can be consumed via custom applications, built in Visual Studio or Xamarin, and they have a rich security layer that we can access. From there, we have a logic layer in Dataverse here, because the logic is below the API. This helps us ensure that we have a consistent experience across all of our applications accessing our data. But then, of course, we get into the heart of Dataverse. Dataverse, you expect it to be maybe just a database, but as we're saying, it's more than just a database. That is a big part of it there. Again, support for all kinds of data from relational to non-relational data. And then, of course, storage. There's all the log files, semi-structured data, everything we're talking about, and then the integration pieces that we mentioned as well. So all of these kind of make up what Dataverse is. And when I say we have a rich security layer, there are multiple levels of security. And this is important when you're considering, what you should build something on, a solution on. So we have security starting at the tenant level, where we can have Azure AD conditional access. We have environment level security. So these environments can have different roles to target people who can build apps versus consume applications. We have resource level security. So these are permissions for the applications and the flows and the custom connectors that we're using. There's permissions assigned to Dataverse itself, and cross tenant level permissions as far as inbound and outbound restrictions on the connectors. So lots of integration possibilities there. All right, so we talked a little bit about Dataverse. Now let's talk about how do we manage the application lifecycle with Power Platform? Because again, this is something that if you're doing traditional development, you're used to having a good lifecycle process here. And this is something that we can also leverage in the Power Platform. So we can build using Visual Studio or VS Code. We can test and validate with command line tooling, do live debugging. We can check in our source code with Git and automated CI/CD, and we can deploy and distribute in organizations and across tenants. A lot of this is made possible as far as deploying across instances with environments. So environments can be set up a few different ways. They can be tied to geographic locations. They can be used to target different audiences. So maybe in this case, we want to have different environments for a dev, test, and prod to move our applications across that and deploy those. So we can have that same dev, test, prod environments as we do in traditional coding approaches in the Power Platform as well. Every tenant does have a default environment where it's kind of a personal productivity environment that you can leverage. But then you can create non-default environments like we mentioned, either based on geographic location or dev, test, and prod, whatever it might be, that you can have additional security and restrictions on. And how we kind of build the solutions and how package up what we build and are able to deploy those is with something called solutions. They allow us to package up and maintain the components that make up one or more business solutions or applications. So these are authored by a publisher. And with the solutions, especially when you're leveraging Dataverse to store your data, you can package up your whole data model, so your tables, your forms, your charts, all of that, option sets. You can package up the user interface along with that, so the Power Apps Canvas apps you build, model-driven apps, those PCF controls, custom connectors, and all of that, your process and your code, and even things like Power BI reports. Everything can be packaged up nicely in a solution so that you can seamlessly deploy everything. These solutions can also be layered as well. So if you have any dependencies or whatever, it supports layering. The other thing you're probably wondering is, in custom code, I had config files to help be able to set properties and like data sources and all of that. We have that same thing in Power Platform, leveraging environment variables. So these let us migrate our application configuration. They can use, configurable input parameters and model-driven apps, Canvas apps, and flows. And we can even bind and update these values in our build pipelines. One of the newest things that's come around with environment variables is the ability where we can actually go and create a variable just by clicking new with inside a solution, an environment variable. And we now have support for data source environment variables. So if we want to be able to dynamically update our data source when we're deploying an application, say from a dev version of our database to a production version, all we have to do is set a data source environment variable for that, and we can update that automatically, which is pretty cool and was one of the biggest kind of pain points as far as migrating solutions is in Canvas apps, for example, having to go update your connector and switch it to the correct data source. Now we have these data source environment variables to help us with that. All right, and again, we can leverage Power Apps build tools, and we can create build pipelines just like we're used to in custom code and code first type solutions, and we can deploy those to production. So this is an example of some of the build tools that we have in the pipelines. So we have a tools installer for Power Apps. We can export and unpack solutions. That segues us into how do we keep track of the source code? So we know we have environments to move stuff between dev, test, and prod. We know we can package it up as solutions, but how do we actually get that source code? Well, this is another new feature that was released not too long ago when it comes to our Canvas applications and Power Apps. We can actually leverage new source code tooling to extract our Canvas applications, and then we can make changes to that in things like Visual Studio Code. So we have a MS app file here, for example. We can run a command line tooling for the Power Apps source code, and that will actually, it's called PA SOPA, as you're seeing here. This will take the contents of that Canvas application and extract out all the code. Now, there's a few reasons why this is really powerful and really cool. One, obviously, being able to share your source code and leverage GitHub to host your code, but also making mass changes. If I needed to change an icon color or name across several different screens, I can do a find and replace in the code, easily update that, and then I can just repackage it up with the command line tooling and redeploy it, and I'm good to go. So it's good for making mass changes, but also for being able to easily collaborate as well, because as we know, when we're working on a Power App, two people can't be and have the Canvas app open at the same time. It's locked for editing. So now we can both collaborate, or lots of people can collaborate on things with the source code tooling and merge all of those changes back in, just like we would in traditional code. So lots of great possibilities with the new source code tooling. And we're actually leveraging this behind the scenes in that PNP sample repo. So actually that brings me to another good point I wanted to make. So if I go to aka.ms/Power Platform samples, this will take us to the new PNP sample repo that we set up for Power Platform samples. So we have a very cool front end of it where you can explore what type of samples that we have. We have everything in here from full-fledged Power Apps templates to specific components to Power Automate flows, all the way to custom functions, which is some new functionality that we can do in Power Apps to have reusable functions that we use. So you can easily explore this by clicking the filter here and finding what you want. Whoops. Looks like I have a little blip on my screen there. There we go. Filtering by what you want, clicking on it. And then if we look behind the scenes and go into one of these samples, this is all hosted on GitHub. And one of the things that we do when we're contributing a Power Apps Canvas sample, whether it's a component or a template, is we leverage that source code tooling. So if you look, we have a folder in the GitHub repo called source code, and these are all of the different extracted pieces of the Canvas application. So what does this help us do from the repository standpoint? Well, it enables us to validate and inspect this application without having to actually go and deploy that in that zip file, that MS app file, into our environment. Because what if there's something malicious in there? You never know. So we can look through the source code, validate that everything looks good, package it up, and provide the validated MS app file. So this is all source code that we have here. YAML files is what it uses, so we can look into any one of these, like the app YAML, and we can see what's going on behind the scenes. This one is a component sample, so I can see this is my calendar component YAML file that has everything going on behind the scenes in this particular component sample. So we're actually leveraging this in practice within the PNP sample repo there. The cool thing again about this though is even though you submit your code unpacked with the source code tooling, we do have in each folder, as you can see here, a solution file. So we do repackage that back up. So all someone that wants to consume it has to do is download the MS app file to get started with it. So definitely, I know it was mentioned in the chat a little bit earlier, so thank you for everyone that mentioned it. But if you have anything that you would like to contribute, whether it's an app template, a component, a custom function, a cool flow, dashboard, a chatbot, whatever it might be, go to aka.ms/Power Platform-samples and get those submitted here so that everyone can benefit from that. All right, so getting ready to wrap up here. Other thing I want to touch on is how does testing and debugging work in the Power Platform? This is another area where we have lots of great tools to take advantage of. One that I love is the Power Apps Monitor. Oops. I clicked too fast there. So this allows us to have real-time debugging of our Power Apps and our Canvas applications as you're seeing here. So we have this Northwind sample application. I can run the application. It's going to log what's going on behind the scenes so that I can tell if something's not working right. Maybe I have a patch statement and it's just not submitting the data to the database. I can open up the Power Apps Monitor and it can tell me if maybe I'm getting like an unauthorized error or what exactly is happening behind the scenes. The other cool thing about the monitor also is we can have someone look at this and do test sessions at the same time. So I can have an end user invite them to a monitoring session, and I can monitor in real time as they're using the application what's going on. And we can share these logs out and get our colleagues' feedback on that and everything. So really rich, debugging tools available in the Power Platform. The other one that we have is Solution Checker. So as I mentioned, we're able to package up our holistic business applications, all the data model and the front end and all of that in solutions. So when we're leveraging solutions, we do have a solution checker that will run through and do some performance and stability risk analysis on the solutions that you have and provide you some details and areas that you might want to look at on that. And the last thing I wanted to touch on here really is probably the biggest question is how do we actually manage a low-code platform? If we're going to embrace this and start building a lot of our applications and solutions on this, it seems like it might be a nightmare to manage. Well, thankfully, there's lots of integrated tooling in the platform that we can take advantage of. For one, in the Power Platform Admin Center, which you can get to by going to admin.powerplatform.com, we have some built-in admin analytics and maker analytics that we can take advantage of as far as what we're seeing here of capacity and data source usage, and all this data is stored in there for 28 days and it's refreshed daily. The other thing that we can do, though, in addition to the Power Platform Admin Center, is we have management connectors and PowerShell modules that we can leverage. The management connectors are Power Platform connectors that allow you to manage the Power Platform, so using the own tools to be able to manage it. So we have different connectors for managing Power Automate, for Power Apps, and even Maker connectors where we can get different levels of information, like show me all of the new Power Apps that were created today, or show me all the Power Apps that are using this connector, and things like that. And the same thing that we can do in those connectors, we can also leverage PowerShell for. So we have Microsoft Power Apps Administration, PowerShell commandlets that we can leverage as well to get that layer of information. I saw an interesting post the other day by Hero, and he was showing leveraging these PowerShell commandlets to be able to bypass that pop-up that shows to validate the connectors you're using when an app initially loads. So that's a cool example and relevant one that he just posted about of where you can leverage these PowerShell commandlets. With the management connectors, this is just an idea of how they can work in implementation. So for example, one that I use a lot is the get list of new Power Apps, Power Automate connectors. So you can get an email every day letting you know what the new connectors are out there. The other thing from a management perspective is when it comes to securing your data. So another big thing that the Power Platform offers is something called data loss prevention policies. So this allows you to enforce rules as far as the connectors and which ones can be used together. Because we want to make sure we're not leaking ever any personal identifiable information or anything like that, and that we're staying compliant with different rules there. And the sheer fact that there's over 400 different connectors to all kinds of services can be a little bit scary because you might accidentally build something, say, that tweets out personal financial information. So what we offer to counteract against that is these data loss prevention policies, which allow us to classify different connectors in buckets. So we can either just completely block a connector where no one can use that in any of your Power Platform solutions, or we can identify and classify a connector as business data or not business data. And how those classifications work is meaning if you have an application or Power App that you're building and you want to connect to Dynamics and then also Twitter. If Dynamics was classified as business data and Twitter was classified as no business data, you couldn't use that combination of those two connectors in the same application or the same flow in Power Automate. It restricts that. You can only use the connectors that fall in the same bucket. So that's one way to restrict that. And lastly, the one thing that you probably want to look at as well when you get really serious with the Power Platform is installing something called the Center of Excellence Toolkit, or COE Toolkit. This really just takes the administration and governance that we can do to the next level. Again, leveraging Power Platform products itself to give you more insight into the governance and the analytics and nurturing your Power Platform implementation. So we have a few different components. There's the core components as far as helping you better manage your DLP policies, helping you see, who, if you have orphaned application, changing app ownership. We have compliance components. There's a sample Power Apps Canvas app to run through an audit process of an application. We can archive unused applications. We can act based off of certain connector usage. And then one of the things I love about it as well is we have some nurture components. So this helps you onboard new makers and schedule training and offer training classes and all of that for new makers. So you can go to aka.ms/COE starter kit to start using that and see how you can implement that in your environment. I did want to leave you with some resources. So the source code tooling for Canvas applications that I mentioned is available there at that URL on GitHub. The build tools, if you want to leverage those to automate your pipelines, you can leverage that in the Visual Studio Marketplace for the Power Apps build tools. Those Power Apps component framework samples, those are available in the PCF gallery at pcf.gallery. Power Platform connectors, there is a repo of connectors that people have built that you can start using. That is also on GitHub. And then the last two are very, very new, and I'm really excited about because I kind of had a hand in helping these be built. We have a Fusion development learning path and an ebook, an approach to Fusion development. So this kind of walks you through scenarios of how can code-first developers and citizen developers work together, and how can you leverage those tools to build a solution. So the ebook, for example, walks you through creating an API, making that a custom connector, putting it in API management, deploying it, and using that inside of a Power App. So it walks you through that whole ins and outs of the process to give you some ideas of how you can extend your teams and integrate the different services. All right, well, that is all that I had. Let me see if there were some questions in the chat as I was talking there. Can you show some live detail on Power Apps Monitor and Solution Checker? I can show the Power Apps Monitor real fast. So let me actually go into one of my applications. Let's see. Let me go back to apps. Yeah, well, sure, no problem. I can do like a little quick live demo of that if my computer will cooperate with me. And actually for this, I'm going to go off of camera because sometimes when I'm screen sharing, it doesn't like when I do both at the same time. So it might move faster if I turn that off. Okay, so let me open this training portal application in edit mode and we'll see how the monitor works. And it will help if maybe I close down some other tabs here of things that I was working on. Let me see, while that's loading, let's see if there is anything else that I can answer quickly in the chat there. Oh, I don't see anything, so we'll just wait for this to load. Oh, I do see one question while this is loading. Can we make a DLP policy at user level or group level? It means except few people or group, no others can use this connector in organization. Not right now. You can't. I don't know if that's something that they are going to be adding or not, but at the moment, you cannot do that. I do know that they did announce at the Microsoft Business Application Summit an update to DLP policies where you can restrict certain actions within a connector. So, in my Twitter example, you might not want to completely block Twitter, but you just don't want to let people send a tweet. You want them to be able to maybe retrieve a list of tweets so you can do some kind of sentiment analysis or something like that on them, but you don't want them to be able to tweet something. So that's going to be coming soon. I forgot the exact timeline of when that will be available to use, but they did announce that that's a new functionality there. So, okay. So this finally loaded here. This is my training portal application. So if I want to use the Power Apps Monitor to be able to debug things that are going on here, we can click on this Advanced Tools option in the left-hand side. And you'll see the option here for Monitor. So this is going to open up the Power Apps Monitor in a new tab. So what I can do is once this loads and initiates, I can run through a test scenario in my application, and it will log everything that's happening behind the scenes in this particular lock. And I apologize that my computer's being a little bit slow here today. Hopefully it will go up to speed. Okay, so the session now is attached, the monitoring session. So all I have to do, as you see, when I was mentioning that we can invite others, this is what this invite option is. I can have other people join the session so that they can see what's going on with me, and we can debug together, which is pretty cool. I just put in their email address there. So let me play this application, and we'll walk through, and I'll just click into, say, one of these trainings that I have, see some information, and then I'll maybe click the assign button. So now if I switch back to the monitor, you can see it's tracking what I did. So I had a user action where I selected, the result was success. So no errors right now, is putting out the status message. And another cool thing it's doing is showing the duration. So if I notice that my application is being kind of slow and I want to figure out where the slowness is happening, I can use this duration column. This is one I use quite heavily to figure out what's bogging things down. So if I were to maybe go through the assign process and assign this training to myself, that will also go and log in the monitor. So I can see as I switch back here that it's showing that it created a row in my database. It got rows because I do a refresh there, and here's the status 200, which is successful. So I can debug all of this. And I can download this report if I need to share it with anyone. I'll make a copy of the JSON extract of that so I can email it to someone if I want to. And then we can upload a session. So if someone, this is another good use case for it, you could instruct maybe someone that's having an issue to run the monitoring session and send you the monitor log, and you can upload it and see what happened and kind of inspect it. So lots of cool stuff there from the monitoring standpoint. Another one that I didn't really mention is the testing. This is kind of still experimental, which is why I didn't cover it heavily. But you can do unit tests basically in your Power Apps. You do have to enable a particular experimental feature for this to work, which I don't have enabled. Formula of error message. So again, this is experimental, so I don't use it quite heavily, the experimental features there. Okay, so hopefully that helped, showing what you can do with the monitor. In the presentation, I saw that. Yes, I can give you all of the copy of that. Let's see what else. Will it slow using API? Will it slow down your load time? No, I mean obviously, like with anything, it depends, right? I mean, it depends on what you're doing with your API. How are you calling it? I mean, are you trying to call a million records, and get a GET request of all those and loading it into a collection? It really depends on how you're using it. But in general, no, using an API in your Power App shouldn't slow it down any more than using any other kind of connector. How to manage if I have lots of Power Apps? Any tips? Again, I kind of was harping on that center of excellence, but that's a really great way to see a high-level overview. And I apologize, I don't have a demo of that installed to show you because my test account, my environment expired. But it does give you a high-level overview of all the apps you have, and then the ability to mass edit some of that. So as far as applying, like I mentioned earlier, other owners and things like that. So the CLE toolkit has been very helpful for me and lots of customers for managing lots of Power Apps and flows. Let's see, what else? In one slide, you talk about using API management. We can easily expose API to Power Apps. Will the same thing work if we deploy API and app service, or is it only for API management? That is, I believe, just API management. That easy, click experience that I showed is custom to API management. Now you can still create a custom connector around app service, but you have to go through the traditional route. So I can kind of briefly show you, since we have a little bit more time here, what the manual way of building a custom connector kind of looks like here. So if we click on the data tab in environment, we have a custom connector section. So you could expose, like you can have the Swagger file for your API, or you can even use Postman collections or something like that. And we can import that in as a custom connector the manual way, like I'm showing here, by clicking new custom connector. And again, apologies for being slow. So we can either do it from blank, we can have import an open API file or URL or a Postman collection, or even import from GitHub, which is pretty cool because you know how I mentioned that we had that custom connector repository. I think this is fairly new. We can actually import a connector that's in that repo directly into your Power Platform implementation. So as I can see right now in some of these certified connectors, these are all these certified connectors that are out there in that repo. So if I wanted to use one, what's a good one that I could choose? Like, Plum Sale or something, or I can choose that, continue, and that would import that in as a custom connector. So this is what the process looks like. You define your call. This is your security layer where you can choose how are you authenticating into it, again with like OAuth. These are all the services of identity providers we can use. So I mentioned I only named a few like Azure AD and GitHub, but we have a lot, as you can see, from Google and Stripe and Yammer, all of that we can leverage from an OAuth standpoint. So it kind of just walks you through everywhere that you would go, and all the scopes that you would define. You have your definitions. That's where you actually deploy and define your actions as far as what you're going to do. So I have a GET request here to get public forms. So you just define all that. There's my endpoint that I would call in the path, and you can define your response, and just kind of walks you through there. Okay, let's see. Another question I saw here regarding licensing and limitations. What exactly is counted as an API request within Power Apps? For Power Automate, every step is an individual request. What is it, Power Apps? Call to a data source? Yeah, so let's take a look at this connector that we're looking at. So I have an unsubscribe action, I have a get form schema action, and I have a get public forms action. That API request, if I were to have a Power App and I'm in different areas calling each of these actions, each of those calls counts as an API request. And yeah, thank you. Someone just posted in the chat as well. There's good documentation on docs.microsoft.com that walks you through API limitations and how that works. That's a really good resource. I don't know. Someone tell me if I'm missing anything. I think I've answered everything, but my team's just being kind of slow.
Yes, I have to admit you have actually answered everyone's question. So thank you so much. We've got a lot of happy customers here with the information that you've provided. So I think everyone is very happy right now. And we've obviously come almost to the end of the time. So if there's no more questions for April, obviously it's a great pleasure to have April here with us today. And just some great feedback from the community, leaving lots of great feedback regarding the session. So thanks again for everyone who's providing their great feedback. And you can see the list of resources that April has shared. I will share them once again in the chat window, just so that you have some point of reference. But again, April, what am I saying? Sorry, April, any final announcements you'd like to make to the community? I'm sure you're very much in the trenches. So do you have anything to make an announcement of to the community? Any upcoming, any coming announcements or events or anything of that nature?
Yeah, so the big thing coming up next is Microsoft Build. So that is it next week, the week after next, the 25th, I want to say. So I would go to mybuilds.microsoft.com. There will be some cool Power Platform related sessions there and potentially announcements that obviously I can't speak of. But I would definitely encourage everyone to go sign up for that, especially if you're doing a lot of code first development stuff that I talked about today. There's going to be some cool things coming down the pike here for making that integration story even better, and Build is a place to go and to catch some of those sessions for that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, April, for sharing this great insight and answering everyone's questions. So thank you once again. And great comment from Cheryl saying, thank you, April, for a phenomenal session. And your YouTube channel is invaluable. So thank you for that also. So there you go, guys. So there's tons of resources for April. You can follow on a YouTube channel. I will share that in the chat. April, if you do want to share your connection details, feel free to do that in the chat as well. I'm sure many of the community would love to keep in touch with what you're up to, and that'd be really helpful as well.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you for the nice feedback. Thank you for that, Cheryl, and everyone in the chat, and thank you so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Awesome. So that was April, everyone. So if you've not seen April in action, now you have lots of great content, and definitely someone who really understands. Someone's working with Power Apps for such a long time and has such a great insight